Welcome to NoWeedIllinois.com. I'm Monty Larrick. What proponents call medical marijuana has been legal in Illinois for several years. Now state lawmakers are considering legislation that would legalize the recreational use of today's high-potency marijuana for adults 21 and over. No Weed Illinois is fighting that legislation. And pro-pot legislation could be voted on as early as January. No Weed Illinois is asking the public to contact state lawmakers and ask them to vote no on legalization of recreational marijuana. No Weed Illinois will be conducting a series of interviews in the coming weeks to inform the public and leaders in different fields about the negative impact of legal weed. While lawmakers in Illinois consider marijuana legislation, they may want to take a look at what's happening in Colorado, where high-potency marijuana was legalized 5 years ago. I'm joined by Ron Castagna. Mr. Castagna is an educator. He served 17 years as a principal at Lakewood High School in Colorado. The Colorado Association of School Executives named Mr. Castagna as the 2012 Colorado High School Principal of the Year. He was one of the leaders in the fight against legalization of marijuana in Colorado, giving his teens and the impact of marijuana presentation at the Colorado PTA State Convention and Colorado School Administrators meetings. Mr. Castagna, as an educator, why is the legalization of recreational marijuana such a big concern to you?
The 34 years as being an educator, this is just the honest piece of it. We are role models. We are the adults of the world that are setting a tone for our kids. I don't know anywhere. Recreational used to be going skiing. Recreational used to be going to play a pickup game of basketball. Recreational would be playing pickup baseball. I don't know where getting high is recreational. It's just beyond me. And we as adults should be setting a better example for our children.
Better example for our kids, but kids will say, you know what? When you were kids our age, you were smoking marijuana, you were drinking beer. So what's the big deal?
Well, in some cases, that's not true. And maybe that's a part of it. Maybe we make a lot of assumptions out there. When I was 15, I got asthma. I never smoked. I never did pot, and really stayed away from drinking other than a social beer every once in a while. But it cost a lot to go to college, and I wasn't going to do that to my parents who were helping me fit the bill. So I guess sometimes there's just a higher calling.
All right. We want to kind of concentrate on the impact of marijuana on education, and we'll get to a few other areas as well. But how are test scores faring in Colorado schools in the wake of legalization?
You know, the test score debacle, and I will call it that as an educator, never a big fan of one test fitting all kids. When I was principal, the big push was everybody's going to go to college. I was one of the lone people out there saying, wait a minute, we've got kids from all different walks of life. And the same thing can be said about testing, that can be said about the kid that goes to a vocational school. Now, all of a sudden, the big push is kids going to apprenticeships. Duh, we weren't all made the same. So these test scores, they go up a little bit one year, they go down the next, they go up a little bit. I don't know that you can trace anything to the statistics of test scores or attendance or dropout rates, because Colorado has a huge influx of people coming into the state, whether people like the word or not. The regentrification of some of Denver's areas, test scores have gone up in some areas, which make a district look better. So I negate the idea that marijuana and test scores can be linked together.
You touched on dropout rates. How they fared since the legalization of marijuana?
Pretty much Denver's gone up, but a lot of that's regentrification, redevelopment, high-end homes. Sorry, but socioeconomics still makes a huge difference on how well kids do in school. Wish it wasn't so, but it is. So the dropout rates in Denver are actually improving. And I will tell you that educators are working really hard. Again, to me, a huge disconnect between the marijuana and dropout rates.
Are you a little surprised by that fact that dropout rates are actually improving?
No, not given the other circumstances that are involved around um, the Stapleton area, for example, in Denver, which I was fortunate enough to spend a year at a brand new high school there. When you're talking high-end homes and highly educated people moving into those areas, it doesn't surprise me at all that Denver's seeing an increase because there's some very, very involved parents in those areas.
All right. So kids are using today's high potency marijuana in schools in Colorado. That's right.
Correct.
And how are they able to do that? How are they able to get by with that?
Well, sometimes, and I will give you an example. This is a vape pen I took off of a young man, or a teacher took off of a young man and brought down to my office. You put a little bit of the THC wax in there, which can actually go to 100% THC, which is off the charts given the marijuana of the 50s and 60s was anywhere from 3 to 6%. Now 100% THC. So that's any constant user at that age under 21 is losing 6 to 8 points of their IQ permanently.
Wow. How are administrators responding to this in the schools?
Difficult, because the only ones that are still getting in trouble for this are our young people at the rough rate of around 24%, given whatever you believe in surveys or not, kids responding that they've at least tried marijuana once or more often than that. So it's difficult. Police come in, they still write a ticket in some cases. Some school districts have given up even messing with that. They tell them to change their shirt if they smell like it, or they send them home, and it's a slap on the hands, which is not the same as alcohol. Alcohol, it's usually 5-day suspension from most school districts.
So they're a little more lax with marijuana, even though it's more dangerous.
Correct. Absolutely.
Why? Well, why is that? Is it the PC thing to do, to be lax on marijuana, not alcohol?
Part of it is getting into the I didn't do it, I just happen to smell it, it's not on me. It's harder to test for. I can take a breathalyzer, I can bring the police officer in, kid blows in the breathalyzer, the alcohol situation is over. We haven't developed any of the techniques for marijuana yet.
You talked about the damage that marijuana can do to the brain down the road. This has to be a concern with educators and how to deal with that situation.
And it should be, and it is. If most people are obviously average, losing 6 to 8 points drops you from the average to below average level pretty quickly. And so we are affecting our workforce, our eventual gross national product. Denver's in a situation where our unemployment rate's very, very low, but go and talk to some of the industry people that still have to test because they have a lot of liability. It's a big deal. It's a big deal when you can't find truck drivers. It's a big deal when you can't find high steel construction workers. It's affecting the whole society in Denver.
Okay. I want to get it a little bit more into that a little later in the broadcast. What about criminal activity on school campuses in the wake of legalization? Beyond just the use of marijuana, are we seeing more criminal activity on the campuses?
I will tell you that one of the last things I had to deal with was some desperate kids who were very much hooked on marijuana, and they eventually found a way to even get by a lot of our security cameras, and they stole 30 laptops. So a whole cart of laptops went out the back door because of some desperate kids.
They wanted the laptops to sell so they could buy pot.
Right.
Wow.
Or other drugs.
And are we seeing more and more of that type of
Uh,
activity?
you know, it's a lot of our schools do an awful lot, and with the addition of more and more cameras, it's less likely to happen on campus. But if you look at how close some of these schools are into neighborhoods, it's happening in the backyards, it's happening down the street, it's happening at the 7-Elevens in a big way in front of 7-Elevens. Um, it's just out there.
What impact is marijuana having in the classrooms right now? Are kids less attentive? Are they sleeping in classes? You know, what's happening in the classroom?
Um, Probably you don't see that as much. I think the message is pretty loud and clear. If you're going to smoke marijuana, stay away from the school. And so I don't have the data hard and fast on what the absentee rates look like, but they were pretty high when I was still in the building. And so I would imagine there's a lot of kids that just say it's not worth going back to school. I'm just high, and I'm going to live with it without going back there.
So they're going out to lunch, maybe getting high and saying, the heck with school.
Sure. Or the local park.
The local park, yeah.
So it's the bigger piece is that they're missing out on opportunities. And when they do get busted, given how college applications go now, if they get busted and suspended in school, that goes on their record. And I have had kids that have gotten some of the most minor infractions not get into the, let's say, Air Force Academy or whatever because of that blemish on their records. So a message to kids, really got to stay away from it, because they will ask you. College campuses don't want incidents on their campus. So they've gotten very strict.
We've talked about students using pot during the school hours. What about teachers? Are more teachers using while on the job?
Not that I noticed. I think it's kind of like anything else. You've probably got your stray wolves. I really believe in our teaching community. I believe they're underpaid and undervalued in our society. I also believe in most of our kids. I believe in this generation. So it's I don't think it's any different than a lot of other organizations. I think most people come in and want to do the best they can for the kids.
Now, back in the 70s, when I was in high school, marijuana was very common on campus. So is anything really changing in Colorado? Are more students using now with the advent of legalization, and are they using it more often?
I think there are more kids using. I think there are more kids that have easy access to it. I will tell you, I've had coaches come in and say, Ron, here's a kid who's a mess because I dropped him off at home and I want to make sure he's okay. And so I walk him inside, and what he told me was true. There's a table full of marijuana and other drugs laying on the table. We have set the standard at a really, really low bar for raising children.
You discussed how kids are using the vape devices to use marijuana. Are they still able to hide it, though, from their parents, their use from their parents and the teachers?
The vape pen's much easier because it doesn't give you the odor that the traditional pot smell is. So they can vape like crazy and walk in the door. And if they walk past their parents and they don't look for their eyes or look for other symptoms, the smell, the odor isn't there.
This is noweedillinois.com, and we're speaking with Ron Castagna, an educator from Colorado, who's very concerned about the legalization of marijuana here in Illinois. They have it in Colorado. Colorado is feeling the impact of that decision that was made 5 years ago. And we here at No Weed Illinois are encouraging Illinois lawmakers to vote against legalization. Ron, your presentation to the PTA and the school administrators was entitled Teens and the Impact of Marijuana. Colorado law says only adults can use pot legally in the state. So what's going on?
Everything from no regulations with the marijuana industry. Nobody has tightened up any of the real laws in Colorado. So we initially were heavily marketing to kids, just the way Joe Camel did in the tobacco industry. There's a lot of that goes on. There is the presence of marijuana in dumpsters. So they harvest their marijuana, throw out whatever's not usable. The kids dumpster dive to get marijuana. And there's a lot of opportunity for kids that are under 21 to get marijuana. You can be a caregiver at the age of 18. You can take care of 6 plants per person that you're caregiving for, and you can have up to 6 people that you're taking care of. So 6 times 6 is 36 plants. If 1 ounce will give you anywhere from 40 to 50 joints, and a grow season for a plant is 2 to 3 times a year, and you can get 4.5 pounds per grow season, it doesn't take a super mathematician to say that's a lot of pot.
It's a lot of money, too.
It's a lot of money. And if an 18-year-old isn't able to have it and smoke it, this is the pieces of putting this on the ballot the way it was in Colorado and getting it approved that make this whole system here in Colorado ludicrous. And whatever politicians want to say, all the way through congressmen or whatever, oh, we've got to legalize the banking and do all this other stuff. There are so many other pieces to this that are a mess in Colorado.
Well, how are kids paying for pot if they're getting so, if it's so readily accessible to them? How are they paying for it? Or are they just stealing from their parents' stash?
You know, if it's doubt the kids are going through the legal method, why would you pay tax on something when you can still get it down the street? This didn't get rid of the cartels. We had a major industry here. They call it an industry, a major group in July, get busted, pot enforcement to put to the test. Well, a Sweet Leaf, which was a company, was blowing people away. It was still going out the back door. We still had law enforcement had to make a big bust. It is a corrupt system. I will tell you, my son was in the car with me one day. He said, "Dad, watch this." And we were on Broadway in Denver. He said, "See that kid running across the street?" I said, "Yep, we're at a stoplight." He said, "Watch. He's going to make a drug transaction." Ran out of a pot shop on Broadway, which is every other store, it seems like, on Broadway. Went to a lady that pulled in the Starbucks across the street, made the transaction, and ran back to the store.
Oh, my.
How naive are we? Are you kidding me? You've got something that, you tagged a plant, you tell me how much marijuana comes from it, and this is an honest industry? It's absolutely a joke. There are more pot shops in Denver than McDonald's and Starbucks put together.
And the kid was making a delivery to a woman at Starbucks who's going to be driving.
Right. Exactly.
Right. Well, when I say young people are using a lot of pot in Colorado, I think of teens and college-age people. But what about preteens? Are they using marijuana more often now?
Well, here's the piece of it. The number of visits by teens to emergency rooms and the numbers even of adults. When you have a gummy bear and that has THC in it, we can go beyond preteens. We can go to the careless parent that leaves their gummy bears out and their little kid gets a hold of it. The pets that have eaten the gummy bears, and it's really bad for your little Fido. I can tell you that.
Mm.
So it's we opened up a store and it became a candy store, and we were sleeping at the wheel when we did this.
Well, how are people consuming marijuana in Colorado? Is it more edibles, or is it still smoking as a main avenue?
I believe it's still smoking, and it's a lot of the vape pens. They hit the scene at incredibly the same time, and we've had a lot of emergency stuff just from the vape pens alone, and the synthetic stuff that's out there is maybe even more dangerous than pot.
You talked a little about the workplace in Colorado, and having trouble to find truck drivers, for instance. What else is going on with Colorado and the workplace? Do you have more buzzed people in the workplace that you just have to deal with?
Um, that's what's been reported. Um, Colorado's in a unique situation, but you can't even. There was an article in the news having a hard time finding workers for the restaurant industry because the pot industry pays better. You won't be able to find good warehouse space in Denver at a reasonable cost because the pot industry is growing marijuana in a lot of those warehouses. So we've had impacts all along the way. And because we did this backwards, and because there's no banking, there's no accounting for the money, under the table is probably huge. It's it's a mess. And why would you pay the tax when you can still get it on the corner?
So it's legal, but underlying that is a lot of criminal activity.
Right. And if it's legal for me to have it, why do I care if I bought it off the street?
Yeah.
Who cares?
Those edibles that you mentioned, are they marketed to kids?
Uh, Initially, they were. We took it upon ourselves to call the Girl Scouts and send cease. The Girl Scouts sent cease and desist letters because they were marketing them and making them look like their famous Thin Mint cookies, and changing a word or two from gummy bears to, you name it, lollipops, whatever they could make with this stuff. So it's rampant, and the early on fatalities that Colorado had was because people didn't know what they were ingesting.
The THC level was just too high?
A girl took a candy bar from her dad, thought it was a candy bar, went back to Texas, I believe it was Texas, and ended up in the emergency room uh, because she was deathly ill. She ate the entire candy bar. There's no dosing.
Mm.
We tried. I was a co-sponsor with another woman in Colorado to get legislation passed to limit the amount of THC. The marijuana industry is so strong, has so much money. You have to get signatures to get on the ballot. So we got it approved. We went through all the legislative loopholes, and we're ready to go. Couldn't find a single company that gets the signatures to work with us because the marijuana industry bought them all up.
Well, it would make sense that if you're going to legalize marijuana, you might want to regulate the THC content, but that's not the case, and that won't be the case in Illinois, is my understanding.
Well,
So,
you're walking down another dangerous road. So when the husband who kills the wife because he does the edibles and he does alcohol at the same time, and he shoots his wife and kills her because he's in a psychotic break, I guess we just take that to the price of doing business, just as if a company were to create something that they knew was dangerous, put it out there, and then said, well, we can pay the bills for all the damages that come because it's going to be less expensive than the amount of money we're going to make. This industry has no conscience.
You say this industry. Who is Big Marijuana Inc.?
It is several companies, lots of investors. I will tell you, I don't have the full answer to that. I just will tell you that they've some of them have gotten quite large and keep opening up shop after shop.
You know, proponents might argue that perhaps it's not such a bad thing for students and even teachers to use a little weed, contending that it could reduce stress and conflict and maybe even help curb violence in classrooms. Is that just crazy talk?
Yes. If you're having a psychotic break, it can add to more violence. The amount of homeless in Denver has gone up to critical stages, and it's not just marijuana. If 18% of our kids are going to have some sort of addiction to marijuana because they're using it at such a young age, then that to me is a crisis. And so this isn't just, oh, I get high and it's gone. For the people that have that addictive personality, so where's my next high coming from? And then it leads to, well, if the cartel is pushed out to some extent from the marijuana industry, they're not just going to go away. They're going to sell you meth. They're going to sell you heroin. They're going to sell you the next high. And that's why I look at this as Nero fiddling while Rome burned. The government has gotten into the business that they criticize the opioid industry for. They've legalized something that is just as dangerous, and they have no protocols for even medical marijuana.
Well, proponents might argue that, you know, marijuana will help us to curb the opioid crisis. What's your take?
What proof do they have? They have started from the very beginning. The reason why it passed on the ballot. This is going to solve everything. This is going to cure Alzheimer's. This is going to cure PTSD. This is going to cure everything for kids with seizures, which is not true. It works in about a third, from what I've been told by medical doctors. And then once a medical doctor knows you're on CBD oil, they won't treat you anymore because they don't have the science behind it. We did everything wrong about this chemical.
Everything. One of my daughters was in Denver recently for part of a research project, and she noticed people just hanging around smoking weed on the library steps, the main library there. Is that typical? Do non-users just have to put up with that now?
Yes, and it's become at a critical stage. We were successful, and here's the other piece of this. We were successful in certain parts of this city. I live in Centennial. You can't have a shop in Centennial. You can't have a pot shop in Littleton, but you can have one in Denver. You can have one in Aurora. Where do these pot shops open? There isn't one at the Cherry Creek Mall. I can guarantee you that. So this has become a socioeconomic thing. So when the people in Illinois sit there and say, oh, our people are going to stop getting incarcerated, then why did our attorney general have to go and have reported that we had 74 people locked up in jail because they were trafficking in a cartel, still here in Denver? It didn't eliminate that. It's all over Denver, and it's all over in cars. People are vaping. You can't smell it. My wife and I had a personal, 6 months after it was passed, we had a car go through our back fence. The car reeked. There was no testing. There was no nothing. So it's not lowered the crime rate in Denver. It's not lowered the trafficking of drugs in Denver. And I guarantee you what your daughter saw was the librarians have, what's the drug that they give when people have overdoses, the Narcan. They're equipped with Narcan in the library because it's that bad.
Oh, my. You mentioned the cartels. Are they getting bigger in Colorado with the advent of marijuana legalization?
Well, there's been several busts. One was heading to Chicago where they busted huge bales of marijuana heading towards Chicago. So we've unleashed a huge mess, and there is no real definable benefit to this. For every dollar we make in tax revenue, we are spending 10 times as much in rehabilitation, in police enforcement, in managing the industry, which is a joke, and it is not a revenue enhancer.
Well, we're told in Illinois that legalization will result in a lot of tax revenue, will create jobs, and it will keep kids out of the criminal justice system. You would say,
how does it keep? It's still a crime for the kids in criminal justice. So are we just going to throw up our hands and say whatever happens to these kids happens to them? You know, some of life's lessons is about getting caught and not making the same mistake again. I had a great friend of mine who worked with me, and he used to say all the time, we are all mistake-making human beings when a kid would get in trouble. And we would do everything we could in our building to welcome kids back after learning one of life's lessons and forgetting what they had done before because we wanted to move on and give them the best shot at life. How do you do that when we're the role models, we're putting this out there, and it's just okay? You don't learn life's lessons? I started a program early on, rather than suspending kids, that we would send them to a store in the mall where there was an empty store and the mall was working with us. We're taking kids off the street so they weren't just suspended to run around, and that police officers would make sure they always did their homework that we sent with them. They would always take care of some graffiti. They would talk to them about drug addiction, whether they were there for that or not. But we made it something better than just suspending kids. And what we're doing is we're throwing our kids to the wolves. If 17% of 24% of the kids who say they're using marijuana are going to become addicted, how is that better than the opioid industry?
it's not. Any chance that Colorado voters will say enough is enough and try to roll back the legalization of marijuana?
You know, the polls, we stood a chance of getting that passed. Our polls, when we passed that piece to say where are people with limiting the amount of THC, that had a very good chance of passing. People are tired of it, but
the genie's out of the bag now. It's hard to do.
They have deeper pockets. They have huge pockets. And this has become an industry. And now they want to trade it publicly. And it's, it's the tobacco industry all over again. And I am waiting for the lawsuits to land because somebody's going to get fed up enough where their kid, and some of them have already done it, where their kids have died because of this. And it's going to be the next big lawsuit. We just don't learn from our mistakes.
Right. I said genie out of the bag. I should have said genie out of the bottle. President Trump has suggested that it may be time to scrap federal laws on marijuana and leave it up to states to decide on legalization. Bad idea? Good idea?
Well, this is a whole other kind of subject, but it's a slippery slope. It's illegal now. How did we get there? If we all believe in the Constitution, if all these people are so concerned about what's going on in America, how did Colorado get to slip this one under, and how did Washington get to slip it under? I'd rather see it be readjusted and find out what real benefits there are, create real protocols for marijuana so people don't pick up their stakes and move to Colorado and find out that the CBD oil didn't work for their child. So where there's a huge disconnect with what really works, what's really true. So let's give a veteran coming back in marijuana because it works for this handful of people they can get testimonials for, but is it really taking a whole bunch of other vets to being lethargic and not finding a job and putting them out on the streets? We have a huge homeless problem right now that was much smaller, but they're coming here because it's legal and I can hang out and I can be a non-productive part of our society. That's not marijuana. And you don't want to get me started on Donald Trump, but that's a whole other subject.
Okay. Well, proponents of marijuana are suggesting that Illinois can learn from Colorado's mistakes. We can really put a strong law in place that'll make sure that it keeps marijuana out of the hands of kids, and to make sure that our roads are safe, that workplaces, schools, and et cetera. Is that just wishful thinking?
It's a lie. It's a damn lie. How they're going to be in everybody's home? They're going to monitor where the marijuana goes? Are they going to watch what's going out the back door? I thought Chicago had enough issues that adding an issue of trying to monitor this and low tax dollars, somebody just needs to simply do the math and say, what's it going to take to police an industry that they say is going to be better? And if they're not willing to already limit the THC because they don't want to have to compete with, we're pretty darn good growers in this country, and we've learned how to get THC way up there, and we're not willing to limit that, and Chicago isn't either. It's not a good mix. And the industry, I wouldn't eat an edible because there's no FDA, because it's not approved by the federal government to regulate how this stuff is produced. People were making some of this stuff in washing machines. It was disgusting. People have no idea what they're ingesting.
Well, what should Illinois voters be telling their lawmakers in advance of possible legislative action on marijuana? Could happen as early as January.
The truth that when I asked a superintendent from a very large school district here what the impact is of the tax dollars that are supposed to be going to schools, he said, we just hired more counselors, Ron, with the money we got to help kids that are getting hooked on marijuana, to help kids with drug abuse. So the money didn't go to rebuilding schools. The boondoggle of the $42 million that came in, law enforcement needed to be enhanced. We're still waiting for the magic testing system when somebody gets pulled over for driving under the influence. How long has the THC been in their systems? We've created a system where we all become victims.
So the state, the public isn't really benefiting, but Big Marijuana Inc. is. They're getting rich.
Of course, they're getting rich. And it's sitting in safes in their homes because, once again, the backwards piece of this was federal law, banking. There's so many pieces of what Colorado did. And I'm not saying the federal government should go and change the banking industry. I think it is just a travesty as to how the whole thing was set up.
Well, we talked about what voters should be telling their lawmakers. What about parents? What should parents be saying to their kids about marijuana?
Hopefully the piece that we've all been saying, this isn't going to help you. It really does lower your IQ in the developing brain. 6 to 8 points of your IQ is nothing to sit there and go, I've got extra. It is a dangerous drug. And it's more dangerous than what we smoked back in the 60s or 50s, or it is 32% is a good average of what's coming out of these places for THC in marijuana. And a lot of the CBD oil that's being created, if you don't get the right one from London or somewhere else, a lot of it still has THC in it.
educators and pastors need to be talking about this too?
In an educated, get the real facts. Um, Kids don't like scare tactics, but they need the truth. And the one thing that, as an administrator, after my years as an educator, uh, every meeting I had with every class every year was, I will never lie to you. And we had lots of situations where things happened that weren't good, and I would get on the PA and be honest with the kids. When Columbine happened 8 miles down south from me, I told those kids, because I had a lot of open enrollment kids, and we took care of it up front and honestly. And when you have the trust of your kids, they start to believe, and they start to understand that you're only looking out for their own good. We have a lot to overcome. There's a lot of dysfunctional parents out there. There's a lot of dysfunctional situations where kids are thrown into homes with drugs because it's okay as an adult. I never, ever drank while I was an administrator because I felt hypocritical if I were breaking the rules that I was holding kids to.
Well, Ron, thank you so much for your comments today. Ron Castagna, educator who is fighting the recreational use of today's high-potency, turbo, industrial strength marijuana. Do you have some contact information if folks would like to maybe get in contact with you, Ron?
I do. I have a Gmail that I guess will be posted, but it is rdrc5455@gmail.com.
All right. Could you maybe repeat that one more time?
rdrc5455@gmail.com.
All right. Thank you so much. God bless you and your work.
Well, thank
And
you guys.
I'm
Keep
sorry, I interrupted.
No, keep up the good fight, and I hope Illinois finds a much um, goes to their heart, uses their heart. I always just tell our kids at every graduation, just remember what Mr. C said: engage your heart before your brain. So let this take some heart. Might be money, it might be revenue, but that's not a good enough answer.
All right. Thank you so much, Ron.
Thank
And
you.
thank you for listening to this edition of NoWeedIllinois.com. Until next time, God bless.